I was lying in bed the other night, just doom scrolling, as you do.
Oh, yeah, we have all been there.
Right. And I had this thought that it wouldn't leave me alone. We always talk about evil in the news like it's this sudden, explosive event.
Like a monster just appearing out of nowhere.
Exactly. A monster appears, does something terrible, and we all gasp. But I was thinking, does it really work like that? Or is that just, the movie version? Because in my experience, the things that really damage people, toxic workplaces, corrupt systems, abusive families.
They don't start with an explosion.
No, they start with a whisper.
That is such a crucial distinction. We are trained to look for the villain twirling his mustache, but usually what we find is just logistics, bureaucracy, people just, doing their jobs.
Yes, and that is exactly why I am so excited about the stack of research we are deep diving into today. We are looking at the work of Dr. Dorothy W. Parker. And I want to be clear right off the bat, this isn't a true crime deep dive.
Yeah.
And it's not a philosophy lecture on morality either. Parker is doing something that I honestly haven't seen before. She treats evil as a structural problem, almost like an engineer looking at a faulty bridge.
It is an operating manual, really. We are going to be exploring her framework on what she calls the pandemic of evil and, more importantly, the antidote, which she calls sovereignty.
Which is such a fascinating term for this.
It is. And to give you the roadmap here, Parker argues that evil isn't some spooky supernatural force. It is a contagion. It is a virus. And like any virus, if you understand how it transmits, you can build an immune system against it.
I love that shift in perspective because it takes the helplessness out of it. If it is a virus, we can study it. So let's start with the diagnosis. How does Dr. Parker actually define evil? Because that is obviously a heavily loaded word.
She defines it as structural agreement.
Structural agreement.
Yes, and that phrase really stopped me in my tracks when I first read it. She is arguing that the specific act of harm, the crime, the abuse, the fraud, that is just the output. It is the final symptom.
So the act itself isn't the root of the problem.
Right. The actual evil is the network that stabilizes that output. It is the surrounding structure that agrees, silently or explicitly, to let it happen. She argues that for evil to endure in a functional society, three things have to happen simultaneously. She calls these the 3 pillars of persistence.
Okay, let's walk through these pillars, because I have a feeling a lot of us are going to recognize them, not just in the news, but, in our own offices or social circles.
You definitely will. The first pillar is collective agreement. Now, this isn't necessarily everyone signing a formal contract to do bad things. It is much more subtle.
Like an unspoken rule.
Exactly. It is the implicit understanding that the group's survival is more important than the truth. It is the nod.
The nod. I think I know exactly what you mean by that. You are in a meeting, the boss says something that feels wrong, maybe it's unethical, or maybe it's just cruel, and everyone just looks around.
They scan the room. And the moment one person nods, and then a second person nods, the agreement is set. If you speak up after that moment, you aren't just disagreeing with an idea. You are breaking the group cohesion. You become the threat.
Wow.
Parker points out that human beings are herd animals. We are wired for safety in numbers. Evil exploits that wiring.
So it is that moment where social safety overrides our moral instinct. That makes perfect sense. And I assume that slides right into the second pillar.
It does. It slides directly into normalization. Parker points out that normalization is incredibly quiet. It doesn't announce itself with a megaphone. It is a shift in the internal atmosphere where the unthinkable becomes just how business is done.
She talks about cognitive dissonance here, doesn't she?
She does. The human brain hates conflict. If you are participating in a system that is hurting people, your brain basically has 2 choices. Acknowledge the horror and feel terrible, or reframe the reality so it doesn't look like horror anymore.
So normalization is that reframing process.
Exactly. It turns participation in harm into a form of initiation or privilege.
Like telling yourself, I am not covering up a crime. I am just being a loyal team player.
Yeah, I am a professional. I am doing what is necessary for the company. That is the language of normalization. It lowers the volume on your conscience. And then you have the third pillar, which locks the whole thing in. Sanctions.
The punishment for stepping out of line.
The enforcement mechanisms. And Parker makes a really crucial distinction here between formal and informal sanctions. We usually focus on the formal ones.
Like NDAs, lawsuits, getting fired.
Yeah.
The paperwork of silence.
Yes. But Parker argues the informal sanctions are actually what keep most people in line.
The stuff that isn't written down in any HR manual.
Reputation destruction, the cold shoulder, exclusion from the network. It is the threat that if you break the collective agreement, you don't just lose your job. You lose your tribe. You become a pariah. She calls it social death. And for most people, social death feels just as terrifying as actual death.
This is where she brings up the Epstein model, right?
Right.
And just to clarify for everyone listening, she is not talking about the specific crimes of Jeffrey Epstein here, but rather the structure of protection that surrounded him.
Correct. She calls it Epstein energy, or the Epstein class. Her point is that if you focus on the monster, the individual predator, you miss the actual point. You can catch the predator, put him in jail, but if the network remains, another predator will just fill the slot.
Because the infrastructure is still there.
Exactly. The Epstein model is a system where access and protection are traded for silence. It is a marketplace.
And what is really terrifying is how easy it is to enter that marketplace.
Yeah.
I think we like to imagine that joining a corrupt network requires, I don't know, a blood oath in a dark room. But Parker says it is much more seductive than that. She talks about incremental consent.
This is one of the most important takeaways from her research. Nobody starts by agreeing to the worst thing. You start by agreeing to the perk, the invitation.
The VIP pass.
Yes. Parker writes that the entry point to evil usually looks like a massive opportunity, a mentorship, a career break. The first yes isn't to harm, it is to privilege.
It is the golden handcuffs. But they don't feel tight at first.
They feel like comfort. But then comes the test. A small compromise. A request to look the other way. A joke you are supposed to laugh at but isn't actually funny.
And because you have already accepted the access, you feel indebted.
You rationalize the small silence, and then a slightly bigger silence. Parker calls this trading sovereignty for belonging. By the time you realize you are in a predatory network, you have already given away your power in monthly installments.
Trading sovereignty for belonging. That is a chilling phrase. It explains so much about corporate fraud, political scandals, even toxic family dynamics. But here's the question that comes up for me. If this is happening all around us, why don't we stop it? Why do we look at these structures and just let them grind on?
Well, this leads to the second major part of Dr. Parker's framework, the vulnerability. She identifies a phenomenon she calls the sovereignty bypass.
Which is what exactly?
It is the outsourcing of conscience. It is the deep-seated belief that someone else, an expert, an agency, the police, HR, is responsible for fixing the problem. We tell ourselves, if it was really that bad, the authorities would do something.
We wait for a parent figure. We wait for the institution to save us.
Right. But Parker argues that this is a fatal error. She notes that institutions suffer from a convergence of incentives. An institution's primary goal is never truth. Its primary goal is survival. It cares about donors, reputations, stock prices, and political stability.
So asking the institution to investigate itself is completely pointless.
It is a conflict of interest at the structural level. Parker poses the sociological paradox. She asks, how do you contain a contagion when the quarantine officers are asymptomatic carriers?
Oof. Break that down for me. Asymptomatic carriers.
Think about the people in charge. The HR directors, the board members, the politicians. They might not be the ones committing the direct harm. They aren't the predators in the literal sense.
But they benefit from the stability of the network.
Exactly. They get the status, the salary, the peace and quiet. So they carry the virus. They protect the virus. Even if they don't look sick, they have zero incentive to cure it.
That explains why whistleblowers get absolutely crushed. They aren't just attacking a bad actor. They are attacking the immune system of the institution itself.
Yes. And Parker categorizes the people who get caught in this meat grinder. She calls them the casualties of the gap. The gap between what we think society is, just and fair, and what it actually is, which is structural agreement. She identifies 3 types of people who fail to process this reality.
Who are they?
First, you have the cynic. The cynic sees the corruption, realizes the institutions won't save them, and collapses into nihilism. Everything is fake, nothing matters, everyone sucks, they just check out.
I think we all know a few cynics. It is a defense mechanism, isn't it? If I don't care, it can't be hurt.
It is. Then you have the complacent. These are the people who see the cracks in the wall but decide to just put a nice painting over them. They choose comfort over truth. They decide to enjoy the buffet on the Titanic.
Denial is a strategy. If I don't look at it, it isn't happening.
And finally, you have the polarized. These are the people who use the crisis to fuel tribal hatred. They see the evil clearly, but they project it entirely onto their political enemies.
So they become part of the problem.
They become carriers of low-frequency energy themselves, screaming, attacking, polarizing, while the actual structural machine keeps grinding on, totally unaffected.
So if we are not careful, we end up cynical, asleep, or just another angry voice on the internet. none of which actually stops the virus.
Correct. None of those are solutions. They are symptoms.
So what is the solution? Parker's work pivots here to the concept of sovereignty. But I want to be clear, because words really matter. She is not talking about political libertarianism or the sovereign citizen movement, is she?
No, not at all. And this is a crucial distinction to make. She uses sovereignty in a biological and systemic sense. She defines it as a functional condition of a living system.
A functional condition. Okay,
Yeah.
give me an analogy for that.
Think of a cell in your body. A healthy cell has a membrane. It decides what gets in, like nutrients, and what stays out, like toxins. If that membrane fails, the cell dies. Parker defines sovereignty as the governance of access to your body, your time, your attention, and your energy.
She has that great quote. Sovereignty is not proven by what one tolerates, but by what one regulates.
That is the core of it. We often think being a good person means being tolerant, open, porous. Parker says, in a pathogenic environment, being porous is suicide. To be sovereign, you must become the gatekeeper of your own energy. And to do that, you need what she calls frequency literacy.
Okay, frequency is a word that can get a little esoteric, a little woo-woo. How is she using it here?
She is using it like a radio engineer would. Everything is a signal. Words are signals. Emotions are signals. Social pressure is a signal. Frequency literacy is the ability to read the vibe or the intent behind the signal before you let it into your system.
It is the ability to discern if an interaction is extractive.
Exactly. Is this person trying to feed off my validation, or is this generative?
So it is the immune system of the soul. It is trusting that gut check that says, this looks good on paper, but it feels deeply wrong.
Yes. And once you can read the signal, you have to have the defenses to block the bad ones. Parker outlines the 3 firewalls needed to survive a pandemic of evil.
Let's build these walls. What is firewall number 1?
The first is the psychological firewall. Parker calls this the refusal of the hook. To build this, you have to identify your own shadow triggers.
Shadow triggers. That sounds intense. What is an example of a shadow trigger?
Well, what makes you easy to manipulate? Do you have a desperate need to be liked? Do you have a fear of missing out? Do you need to feel smarter than everyone else in the room? Those are your hooks. A predatory system will find your hook and bait it.
Join us, and you will be important.
Agree with us, and you will be safe.
So the defense against that is what? Just not needing those things?
The defense is what Parker calls a high-density ego. Now, ego usually gets a bad rap, but she means a solid self. If you validate yourself, if you are solid in your own worth, the system has nothing to bribe you with. You become unhookable.
You cannot be bought if you already have everything you need internally. That is incredibly powerful.
Precisely. That leads to the second defense, the sociological firewall. This is selective proximity. And Parker warns, this is the painful one, she calls it dynamic disconnection.
Walking away.
Walking away, and not just from the obvious villains, walking away from infected networks. Parker argues that we are socially porous. You become the company you keep. If you stay in a toxic workplace because the money is good, or stay in a friend group that gossips and destroys reputations because it is fun, you are slowly absorbing that pathology. You are degrading your own sovereignty.
But that is really hard. I mean, people have mortgages. They have careers. Parker is asking people to potentially blow up their lives.
She is. She fully acknowledges the cost. Right. But she argues the cost of staying is higher. You lose your soul. Her alternative is to build sovereign nodes. Don't try to change the massive corrupt institution from the inside, because that almost never works. Instead, build small, tight-knit groups of high-frequency interaction based on absolute accountability.
Small pockets of sanity.
Small pockets of sanity. A clean network. It is better to have 3 people you can trust with your life than a network of 300 people who are all incrementally compromising.
And the third firewall.
The spiritual firewall. The sovereign, no. This is the law of non-participation.
This sounds like the ultimate boycott.
It is, but it is deeper than just not buying a product. It is a total withdrawal of attention. Parker uses a parasite metaphor here. Evil is parasitic. It cannot generate its own energy. It needs a host. It needs us to look at it, talk about it, fear it, click on it.
It feeds on engagement, even negative engagement.
Especially negative engagement. Outrage is a massive energy source. Parker says if you refuse to host it, if you refuse to give it your fear or your attention, the signal becomes a ghost. It has no receiver. You deplatform the evil in your own consciousness.
That is a lot to process.
Yeah.
We need to audit our own psychology, change our social circles, and starve the beast of our attention.
But Parker's practical about this, right? She doesn't just leave us with the theory. She has an instructor's guide.
She does. She breaks the how-to down into 3 core mechanisms.
Yeah.
Think of this as the daily maintenance of sovereignty. Lock in, lock down, and lock out.
Okay, let's do a rapid fire on these. What is lock-in?
Lock-in is the foundation. It is pure biology, sleep, nutrition, movement, core values. Parker is adamant here. You cannot be sovereign if you are exhausted. If you are sleep-deprived and running on caffeine and anxiety, your prefrontal cortex, the part of you that makes moral decisions, is compromised. You are easy to manipulate.
So step one isn't fight the power, it is get 8 hours of sleep. Literally, yes. She says if you are anxious, lock-in is failing. You have to anchor the vessel before you can steer the ship.
Step 2. Lockdown.
Lockdown is about structure. It is about your routines. It is about removing the chaos from your day-to-day life so you aren't constantly in reaction mode. When you are reacting, you aren't thinking. You are just surviving. You need a stable platform to stand on.
And finally, lockout.
This is the gate. This is the active exclusion of drains. It is looking at your phone, your friends, your media consumption, and asking, does this fragment my attention? Does this make me weaker? If the answer is yes, you lock it out.
Parker mentions a diagnostic for this. How do we know if we're actually doing it right?
She says sovereignty is a somatic signal.
Somatic, meaning felt in the body.
Yes. We can intellectualize boundaries all day long. We can say, oh, I have great boundaries. I read a book about it. But if your stomach is in knots when you talk to that specific friend, or if your jaw is clenched every time you walk into that office, your body is telling you the truth.
It knows you aren't safe.
Right. Sovereignty feels like relief. It feels like your nervous system settling down because it knows, I am safe. I am the driver.
That is such a key distinction. The body doesn't lie. The mind will rationalize everything, but the stomach knows.
The body only cares if you actually close the gate. Knowing you should close it isn't enough.
This shifts the whole conversation. We start by talking about evil out there in the world, these massive, scary structures. But we end up talking about what time we go to bed and who we follow on social media.
That is the absolute brilliance of Dr. Parker's work. She takes the helplessness of the world as burning and turns it into, here are the keys to your own house. She calls this the sovereign locksmith.
I really like that image. You are the locksmith. You design the keys.
You design selective permeability. You decide what gets in, and you stop waiting for the institution or the government or the good guys to come change the locks for you. They aren't coming.
Which brings us to the final challenge she leaves us with.
Yeah.
And it is a bit of a mirror check.
It is. She says we don't need a new political party. We don't need a new charismatic leader to tell us what to do. We need a democratization of discernment.
Democratization of discernment, meaning everyone individually waking up.
Every single person developing the literacy to say no to predatory energy. She asks us directly, are you acting as a host for the very thing you claim to oppose?
That is the question. We claim to hate the drama, but do we click? We claim to hate the corruption, but do we take the perk?
Do we give the nod because it is easier than the conflict?
Oh, that is something to sit with. I think we all have some inventory to do. We have some locks to check.
Indeed, it is constant work, but it is the only work that actually changes the structure.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. We have spent this whole deep dive talking about how this virus spreads laterally, from person to person, colleague to colleague. But have you ever considered what happens when these structural agreements are passed down vertically to the next generation?
Oh, generational transmission.
Exactly. Without a word ever being spoken, the nod becomes hereditary. The cognitive dissonance becomes a family tradition. If evil is a contagion, then your ultimate sovereignty test might not just be protecting yourself. It might be deciding that you are going to be the genetic dead end for this virus.
Breaking the chain completely.
Breaking the chain completely. It is up to you to ensure it stops here. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I know this wasn't a light topic. We went from structural viruses to firewalls to the spiritual immune system, but I hope you feel like you have a toolkit now that you didn't have 20 minutes ago.
Take care of your energy. Check your firewalls.
And remember, sovereignty isn't what you tolerate, it is what you regulate. We will see you on the next deep dive.